In the lush, untamed expanse of the Congo Basin, where the sunlight filters through a canopy so thick it seems like a world apart, there exists a place whispered about in hushed tones, a village erased from maps, spoken of only in riddles. They say those who find it never return, their voices silenced by the jungle. For Daniel, an adventurous anthropologist chasing whispers of lost cultures, this was precisely the kind of mystery he lived for. But he never expected to stumble upon a world where no men existed, and every eye that met his brimmed with silent hostility. Daniel's journey had been arduous. A dense fog clung to the jungle like a veil, obscuring his path and forcing him to rely on his instincts. His compass faltered, spinning wildly, and even the birds seemed to have abandoned this corner of the world. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he thought he was hallucinating. A village stood there, its huts crafted from woven reeds and red clay. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the aroma of roasted plantains hung in the air. But something felt wrong. The laughter of children and the deep baritone of men's voices, sounds that brought life to most villages, were conspicuously absent. Instead, there was an unnerving quiet, interrupted only by the rustle of leaves and the low murmur of voices he couldn't see. If you're enjoying this mysterious tale, be sure to like the video to show your support. And don't forget to subscribe to Afrotales TV so you never miss another story that takes you deep into Africa's vibrant storytelling traditions. As Daniel stepped into the clearing, a chill ran down his spine. Women emerged from the shadows, their expressions unreadable but their eyes sharp and unforgiving. They were clad in vibrant kitenge fabrics, the bold patterns contrasting with the somber mood. Each carried tools, hoes, baskets, machetes, but the way they gripped them suggested these items were as much weapons as instruments of labor. Leave. The word cut through the air like a blade. It came from an older woman with graying braids and a scar that ran from her cheek to her chin. Her voice was firm, her tone final. But Daniel, ever the academic, raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I mean no harm," he said, his voice steady despite the unease bubbling within him. "I'm a researcher. I only wish to learn." The women exchanged glances. One of them, younger but no less imposing, stepped forward. Her face was painted with streaks of red clay, her lips pressed into a thin line. "There is nothing for you here," she said. "Go back the way you came." Daniel hesitated, his curiosity outweighing his better judgment. "Please," he pressed. "I can't leave. The jungle is too dense, and I've lost my way. Let me stay, just for the night." The older woman's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer, her shadow swallowing his. "Stay, and you'll regret it," she whispered. "This village is no place for men." Her words sent a shiver down Daniel's spine, but before he could respond, the women dispersed, retreating into their huts as if choreographed. He was left standing alone, the jungle around him suddenly feeling like a safer option than this ominous village. Night was falling fast, and Daniel knew that wandering back into the jungle would be a death sentence. He found a quiet corner near the communal fire pit and sat down, the weight of the women's warning heavy on his mind. The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the village, and for a moment, Daniel allowed himself to relax. But then he noticed something. The shadows, they moved unnaturally, shifting against the light. And that's when he saw her, a young girl, barely a teenager, staring at him from behind a tree. Her eyes were wide with fear, her finger pressed to her lips in a silent plea for him to remain quiet. Before he could ask why, she disappeared into the darkness. The jungle's symphony of insects and distant howls resumed, and Daniel was left to wonder what kind of village he had stumbled into, and what secrets its inhabitants were so desperate to keep hidden. If this tale has you on the edge of your seat, hit the subscribe button now and join Afrotales TV for more unforgettable journeys into Africa's most fascinating stories. Your support helps keep these tales alive. As the moon climbed higher, Daniel's unease grew. The shadows seemed alive, the silence deafening. And somewhere in the depth of the village, a faint, rhythmic chanting began to rise, a sound that would draw Daniel further into the heart of the mystery, whether he wanted to go or not. The fire crackled softly as Daniel's heart thudded against his ribcage. Somewhere in the darkness, the rhythmic chanting grew louder, low and melodic, yet tinged with an eerie dissonance that sent shivers through his body. It was as though the village itself was breathing, pulsing with life unknown to him. He could feel the weight of unseen eyes boring into him, watching, judging, waiting. What kind of ritual was unfolding in this isolated place? And why did every fiber of his being scream for him to run? Unable to suppress his curiosity, Daniel rose cautiously and followed the sound. His footsteps were light, careful to avoid drawing attention. The village seemed deserted, every hut was dark, its occupants presumably hidden within. Yet the chanting grew stronger, emanating from a solitary hut at the edge of the clearing. This hut was different. Where the others were modestly built with simple materials, this one stood larger and sturdier, its walls adorned with intricate carvings and symbols that glinted faintly in the firelight. The entrance was shrouded by thick, red fabric, and the air around it seemed charged, as though it hummed with invisible energy. Daniel hesitated. His mind raced with questions. Was this the source of the village's hostility? Was he trespassing into a space forbidden to outsiders? But the anthropologist in him, the part of him that yearned to uncover the unknown, overpowered his fear. As he reached for the fabric, a voice stopped him cold. The warning repeated, "Don't." Daniel spun around to see the same young girl who had hidden behind the tree earlier. She was barefoot, her hair in tight braids, and her face smeared with streaks of ash. She looked impossibly small in the vast darkness, but her voice carried a weight far beyond her years. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously. "If they find you near this place, they will kill you." Daniel knelt to her level, lowering his voice to match her urgency. "Why? What's in there?" The girl glanced at the hut, then back at him, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "It's where they keep the offering," she said. "The thing they guard. The thing they fear." Before Daniel could press her further, the chanting reached a crescendo. It wasn't coming from the hut, it was behind them. He turned to see the women of the village emerging from the shadows, their faces painted with ash and their eyes reflecting the firelight like polished stones. They moved as one, their steps deliberate, their voices weaving together in a haunting melody. The girl tugged at his arm. "Hide," she urged. But Daniel was rooted to the spot, captivated by the sight before him. The women formed a circle around the fire pit, their chants growing louder, faster, more urgent. In the center of the circle stood the older woman with a scar, holding a staff carved from dark wood and topped with what looked like a human skull. The old woman raised the staff high, and the chanting ceased abruptly. The silence was deafening. Then she spoke, her voice carrying across the clearing with an authority that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "Tonight, we honor the pact," she declared. "Tonight, we remember the betrayal." The women responded in unison, their voices echoing like a single entity. "We remember." Daniel's mind raced. The pact. Betrayal. He looked to the girl, but she was gone, vanished into the shadows as if she'd never been there. Suddenly, the old woman's head snapped toward the hut where Daniel stood. Her eyes locked onto his, and her expression darkened. "You shouldn't have come here," she hissed, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. The women turned to face him, their expressions unreadable but their intentions unmistakable. Daniel took a step back, his instinct screaming at him to run, but before he could move, the old woman raised her staff again. "Bring him forward," she commanded. The women advanced, their steps synchronized, their movements swift and precise. Daniel's pulse quickened as he realized he was outnumbered, trapped, and entirely at their mercy. As their hands reached for him, dragging him toward the fire, he knew he was about to become part of the ritual, whether he wanted to or not. The flames danced higher as the women closed the circle, their chanting resuming in a frenzied, chaotic harmony. Daniel, now at the center of the firelit stage, felt the weight of their collective gaze. The ritual had begun, and the secrets of the village were about to reveal themselves, secrets that could either save him or seal his doom. If this story has gripped you so far, like this video to support Afrotales TV and ensure we continue sharing these spine-tingling tales. Don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next chapter of Daniel's journey into the unknown. The fire roared, its golden light flickering against the women's faces, casting their painted features in a grotesque dance of shadow and flame. Daniel stood frozen, his heart pounding as he was forced into the center of the circle. The rhythmic chanting grew louder, the melody weaving into an almost hypnotic pulse. It felt ancient, primal, something not meant to be witnessed by outsiders. Yet here he was, an intruder, about to become entangled in a mystery older than the jungle itself. The old woman with the scar stepped forward, her staff planted firmly into the ground as though to anchor the scene. Her presence dominated the circle, and the air seemed to hum with power. She fixed her steely gaze on Daniel, her expression unreadable. "You come uninvited into a place that is not yours," she began, her voice reverberating like a drumbeat. "Do you know what we have sacrificed to survive?" Daniel swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was lost. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you weren't meant to know," she interrupted, her voice a thunderclap of anger and sorrow. "But now that you are here, you will bear witness. You will carry the weight of what has been done." The circle of women began to sway, their movements synchronized as the old woman spoke. Her words came like the steady beat of a drum, deliberate and unrelenting. "Long ago, this village was like any other. Men, women, children, together we lived, loved, and thrived. But envy and greed from outsiders brought death upon us. They came in the night, promising riches, promising peace. We trusted them." Her voice faltered, and the fire seemed to dim, as though mourning with her. "But they lied. They took our men, our husbands, our brothers, our sons, and left us to fend for ourselves. Alone, we faced famine, sickness, and despair. Many died. Those of us who remained turned to the only power that could save us." The women chanted louder, their voices rising in unison as the old woman continued. "We made a pact with the ancestors, a bond forged in blood. They gave us strength, protection, and the means to rebuild. But there was a price." Her eyes locked onto Daniel, and the circle stopped moving, the silence almost suffocating. "No man could remain among us," she said. "The presence of men would break the pact, bring ruin to all we have built." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel's mind raced, piecing together fragments of the story. This village had traded the presence of men for survival, but at what cost? "Each year, we honor the pact with an offering," the old woman continued, her voice lower now, almost reverent. "We guard the power bestowed upon us, and we remain vigilant. Strangers are not welcome. Strangers are a threat." Daniel's chest tightened as he realized the gravity of his presence. "You think I've broken your pact?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The old woman nodded solemnly. "It is not what we think," she said. "It is what the ancestors demand." The chanting resumed, louder and faster, as if the very air around him was vibrating with its force. Suddenly, the fire flared, its flames reaching unnaturally high, and Daniel felt the world around him spin. His vision blurred, and in the flickering light, he saw things that weren't there before, ghostly figures of men, their faces gaunt and sorrowful, their hands reaching out as if pleading for release. He stumbled, gripping the earth beneath him, his breathing shallow. The women didn't seem to notice his distress, their eyes fixed on the fire, their voices unwavering. One of the ghostly figures stepped closer, its form translucent but unmistakably male. Its voice was a whisper, yet it cut through the chanting like a blade. "You must leave," it said, "or they will make you the next offering." Daniel's mind reeled as he tried to process what he had just seen. The pact, the offering, the hostility of the women, it all began to make a terrible kind of sense. If the ancestors demanded the absence of men, then his very presence was a violation, a curse waiting to descend upon the village. But how could he live when the women surrounded him, their movements growing more frantic as the ritual reached its climax? And what exactly would it mean to become the offering? The fire roared higher, illuminating the village in a fiery glow. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and the old woman raised her staff, pointing it directly at Daniel. "The ancestors will decide," she declared. As the flames cast strange, flickering shadows on the ground, Daniel realized that the next moments would determine his fate, and perhaps the fate of the village itself. If this story has you captivated, like the video to show your support for Afrotales TV. And don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now and journey deeper into the heart of this mystery with us. The flames surged skyward, casting wild, flickering shadows across the village. The women encircling Daniel chanted louder, their voices merging into a symphony of power and despair. The old woman with the scar stood resolute, her staff raised high, its carved skull glowing faintly in the firelight. Daniel felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him, as though the very air had become heavy with the spirits of the past. His breath quickened, his heart pounding. What did it mean to be judged by the ancestors? And was there any hope of escape? The old woman's voice cut through the chanting like a blade. "Ancestors, hear us," she cried, her tone a mixture of reverence and desperation. "A man has entered the sacred ground. He has broken the pact. We await your will." The women fell silent, their eyes fixed on the fire. The air around them grew still, unnaturally so. Even the sounds of the jungle, the chirping of insects, the rustle of leaves, faded into an oppressive quiet. Daniel's mouth went dry as he stared into the flames. At first, they seemed to flicker randomly, but then their movements became deliberate, almost alive. Faces formed within the fire, ghostly, distorted, ancient. The ancestors had arrived. A deep, guttural voice echoed from the flames, resonating within Daniel's chest. It spoke in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow, its meaning was clear. "Why have you come here, outsider?" the voice demanded. Daniel stumbled over his words. I didn't mean to trespass. I was lost. I didn't know about the pact." The flames flared brighter, the heat searing his skin. Another voice joined the first, this one sharp and accusatory. "Ignorance does not absolve you. Your presence brings imbalance. You threaten what we have preserved." The ghostly faces swirled, their expressions shifting between rage and sorrow. One figure, distinct from the others, emerged from the fire. It was the specter of a man, his face gaunt but familiar. It was the same ghost Daniel had seen earlier. The specter turned to the women, addressing them with a commanding tone. "You have kept the pact, but at what cost? You have lived in fear, bound by chains of your own making." The women began to murmur, their unified front showing its first cracks. Some looked uncertain, their painted faces betraying doubt. Others clenched their fists, their resolve unshaken. The old woman raised her staff, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "Silence. The ancestors speak, and we must obey." But one of the younger women stepped forward, her face a mixture of fear and defiance. "What if we have misunderstood the pact?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if we've been guarding not just a secret, but a prison? Her words hung in the air like a challenge, and Daniel seized the moment. "She's right," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "What if the pact was never meant to isolate you? What if it was meant to protect something, or someone?" The flames roared again, and the ghostly man from the fire turned to Daniel. "You see more clearly than they do," he said, his voice softer now. "The pact was not meant to banish men but to seal away a great evil. The offering is not a sacrifice of men. It is a word, a barrier to keep the darkness contained." The women gasped, their faces pale with realization. The old woman faltered, her grip on the staff loosening. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That cannot be true. We have upheld this pact for generations." The spectre turned to her, his expression sorrowful. "You upheld it, but you misunderstood it. The pact was corrupted over time, twisted into fear and isolation. The true danger lies not in the presence of men but in what lies beneath this village." The ground trembled, a deep rumble that seemed to emanate from the very earth. The fire dimmed, and the chanting stopped completely. Daniel felt the vibration under his feet and realized that something below the village was stirring. The spectre pointed toward the forbidden hut. "The vault lies there. You have kept it sealed, but its power grows restless. The pact must be renewed correctly this time, or the evil within will escape." The old woman hesitated, her resolve shaken. "And what of him?" she asked, gesturing to Daniel. "What role does he play in this?" The spectre looked at Daniel, his gaze piercing. "He is the catalyst. His presence here is no accident. He must face the darkness and decide its fate." The woman parted, forming a path toward the forbidden hut. Daniel's heart raced as he realized what lay ahead. He was no longer an observer, he was now a participant in a ritual older than memory, a test of courage and conviction. The spectre's voice echoed one final warning. "Step forward, outsider. Enter the vault. But know this, once you begin, there is no turning back." If this tale has kept you hooked, like the video and share it with others who love thrilling stories. And don't forget to subscribe to Afrotales TV so you don't miss the final, heart-stopping chapter of Daniel's journey. The path to the forbidden hut stretched before Daniel, a corridor of silent, expectant faces illuminated by the flickering firelight. The air was heavy with the weight of destiny. As the women parted, their painted faces revealed fear, hope, and a trace of guilt. Daniel's steps were slow, deliberate, each one a small rebellion against the terror clawing at his chest. Beneath his feet, the earth trembled softly, as though something ancient and restless stirred just beneath the surface. What lay within the hut? What kind of darkness had the village kept hidden for generations? Daniel pushed aside the red fabric that veiled the entrance to the hut. The interior was dimly lit by faintly glowing carvings etched into the walls, symbols he didn't recognize, yet they seemed to pulse with life. The air was thick, humid, and carried a metallic tang that made him instinctively hold his breath. At the center of the hut was a trapdoor, its wooden surface marked with deep, dark grooves that seemed unnatural, as though they were burned into the wood. Around it lay a circle of relics, bones, shattered pottery, and a rusted blade that looked centuries old. Behind him, the old woman spoke. Her voice, for the first time, was tinged with uncertainty. "The vault holds what was sealed long ago. Once it is opened, you cannot turn back. You must confront it." Daniel knelt, his hand trembling as he grasped the edge of the trapdoor. He glanced back at the villagers. The young girl he'd seen earlier was watching from the edge of the crowd, her wide eyes pleading for something he couldn't yet understand. With a deep breath, he pulled the trapdoor open. A chill rose from the opening, sending shivers down his spine. A narrow staircase spiraled downward into darkness, carved from stone and worn smooth by time. Holding a flickering torch handed to him by one of the women, Daniel descended, each step taking him further from the relative safety of the surface. The air grew colder, and an eerie hum filled the space, a sound that seemed to vibrate in his bones. The walls bore more of the glowing carvings, but now they told a story: battles, sacrifices, and a monstrous figure shrouded in shadow. At the bottom of the stairs, Daniel entered a cavernous chamber. The center was dominated by a massive, ornate sarcophagus, its surface covered in intricate patterns and symbols. Chains, impossibly large and heavy, wrapped around it, their ends anchored deep into the walls. As Daniel approached, the hum intensified. The sarcophagus seemed to pulse, the chains rattling faintly as though whatever lay inside was aware of his presence. The specter from the fire appeared again, its translucent form hovering above the sarcophagus. "This is the source of the pact," the specter said. "An ancient evil sealed away by your ancestors and mine. It has grown stronger over the centuries, feeding on fear and isolation. The pact was meant to keep it dormant, but now it stirs." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "What am I supposed to do?" The specter's gaze was steady. "You must renew the seal. But to do so, you must face the creature and resist its temptations. If you fail, it will escape, and this land will know suffering unlike anything before." The chains rattled violently, and the sarcophagus cracked open with a deafening roar. Darkness spilled out like liquid, filling the chamber with an unnatural, suffocating presence. From within, a monstrous figure emerged, shapeless and vast, its glowing red eyes the only distinct feature. The creature's voice echoed in Daniel's mind, deep and seductive. "You do not have to fight me," it whispered. "Join me, and I will give you power, knowledge, everything you desire. You are not like these women, you are meant for greater things." Daniel felt the temptation seep into his thoughts, planting seeds of doubt. Images of wealth, fame, and glory flashed before him. But then he remembered the faces of the women above, their lives tethered to this darkness, their sacrifices spanning generations. "No," he said firmly, his voice growing stronger. "I will not be part of your destruction." The creature roared, its form shifting wildly, tendrils of shadow lashing out. Daniel raised the torch, the flames flaring brighter as if fueled by his resolve. The specter spoke again, guiding Daniel. "The chains. Reforge them with the fire of your conviction." Daniel moved swiftly, pressing the torch to the carvings on the sarcophagus. The symbols glowed brightly, and the chains began to tighten, pulling the creature back into its prison. The darkness screamed, thrashing violently, but Daniel held his ground. With one final surge of light, the sarcophagus slammed shut, the chains sealing it once more. The chamber fell silent, the oppressive darkness replaced by a calm, steady glow from the walls. Exhausted, Daniel climbed back to the surface, his limbs heavy but his spirit triumphant. The women greeted him with a mixture of awe and relief. The old woman knelt before him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You have done what we could not," she said. "The pact is renewed, and the balance restored." The villagers began to chant softly, a song of hope and healing that echoed through the jungle. The young girl approached Daniel, her face bright with admiration. "You saved us," she said simply. Daniel smiled faintly, but his heart was heavy. He knew the weight of what he had seen would stay with him forever. As dawn broke over the village, Daniel prepared to leave. The women offered him food and guidance back through the jungle, their hostility replaced by a quiet respect. As he stepped into the dense foliage, he glanced back one last time. The village seemed different now, lighter, freer, as though the air itself had been cleansed. But Daniel knew the story would stay with him, a reminder of the power of courage, sacrifice, and the ancient bonds that tie humanity to the past. If you were captivated by this tale, like the video to support Afrotales TV and let us know your favorite moments in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, emotionally charged stories from the heart of Africa. Your journey into the world of Afro Tales has just begun. Next time on Afro Tales TV, the woman who could read people's futures in their shadows. In a quiet village nestled at the foot of misty mountains, a woman possessed an extraordinary gift. She could see destinies written in the shadows of those who sought her out. Her predictions, uncannily accurate, earned her fame and reverence. But one fateful day, her shadow disappeared. Panic gripped the villagers. How could she see others' futures when her own shadow, her tether to destiny, was gone? As whispers of curses and omens spread, the woman embarks on a perilous journey to uncover the truth. Her path winds through realms of light and darkness, where every shadow hides a secret, and every step brings her closer to a revelation that will change everything she thought she knew about fate and herself. Will she unravel the mystery of her vanished shadow before it's too late? Or is her destiny one she cannot escape? Don't miss the next thrilling tale on Afro Tales TV, a story of fate, mystery, and self-discovery. Hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss the adventure.